So we then moved into a competency-based training environment. So in this case, we needed to reorder the training as a system that the students had developed. Now, the reordering means that we really want the trainer to understand the assessment aspect of the competency. The competency is a descriptor of the skills and knowledge required to perform a task to a defined standard. Now, if the trainer doesn't set the training environment to achieve that, then they've failed in what they're required to do. So training is just not the delivery of the content. It's understanding what the objectives or the final outcome is required by the trainee. And in this case, it's simple to be able to demonstrate the competency. So we get the trainees to start thinking about competency-based training, setting up a training program from the point of view of achieving the competency standard. So we look at a training needs analysis at the steps, and we develop up a thing called a scalar diagram. From that scalar diagram, the trainees have to take their competency and they have to draw and brainstorm and develop up on the chart paper a competency diagram. So at the top will be the unit title and then the elements and then the performance criteria. Now, by asking them to do that, we are actually compelling them to read the competency and to begin to understand the competency. It's not possible to develop a training program with a trainer who doesn't understand the competency. It's the most fundamental element within competency-based training. We take them through a couple of examples of this development process. We then suggest that the next thing to do is to look at the assessment tasks that you want the trainees to be able to achieve at the end, because that's going to have an influence on how you develop your training program. We look at the assessment methods. So we ask the trainees to go into the competency. They have to find the section under the range of variables where the assessment method may be found. We ask them to identify the different methods of assessment that are suggested. We then ask them to go and have a look at the assessor manual and see what assessment methods are being used there. So we then get them to look at the assessment method. It might be observation, and then we ask them to identify what would be the document that would provide evidence that the observation took place. Then that document is the observation checklist. So we ask them to go into their assessor manual and find an example of an observation checklist. We then look at establishing content. Content for competency-based training program comes from an analysis of the competency. So we again look at the scalar diagram which the trainees have developed, and we ask them to identify what are they skill, or is it a knowledge, or is it a combination of both? So once we've identified the skills and knowledge components, we then ask them to look at the range of variables to see if there are any other content that the student must know as a result of the training. Also, we'll get them to go back to the critical aspects of assessment to ensure that they don't miss out on the content that is deemed to be critical to the performance of that action. We then look at sequencing of the content, looking at the choosing of appropriate training methods. We link those training methods and we link that back to the best way we think that individuals learn. So we know from our exercise earlier about learning behaviour that people learn differently. So the trainers have to establish a learning environment which is going to cater for the different learners. So we've demonstrated to them through the program that they're doing that we have phases of that type, those teaching methods throughout the program. We then look at the teaching methods and we match those against skill and knowledge. Which are the best teaching methods to enhance the development of skill and those of knowledge and or attitude. Again, they then have to pick up their training manual for the competency that they're going to focus on, and they have to analyse that, the trainer guide. When they go through the trainer guide indicates a whole variety of different training methods. So we ask them to develop up a matrix in terms of the different types of teaching methods that are offered in the trainer guide. We suggest to them that when mapping out their training program, that they should be aware that not to have too many teaching methods that make the student sleepy. If the training methods are listening, watching, listening, then there's a tendency for the trainee to not be concentrating. So if we can have some instruction, reflection, that will help the pattern to ensure that the training is interesting from the student's point of view. If it's interesting from their point of view, then they will be apt to learn more readily. The ASEAN Toolbox resources are not necessarily the only resources that need to be used. You can, and if you're industry experts, and that's what we expect you are, you will have a number of resources of your own that you can incorporate into the program, which customises it for the group that you're teaching or within your own country.
It is important to learn about the assessment methods and doing the process, because if you know the purpose or the end goal of what you're supposed to get, you can properly do the training. When it comes to the main goal, so let's say in competency-based, you start with a specific skill. When I make my plan, normally it's general. So what happens is I just state the skill that they need to do, but I do not specify the specific competency. So I think it's really a different process, because this requires more depth, and it requires time to build a curriculum in this way. And it is a very good tool to positively provide the learning that the person needs. So it's not just in general, but you're able to identify the specific skill, specific knowledge, or specific attitude that the person requires in their specific work.